definitely is a problem with anti-Semitism. Whether it's dormant or not, it's not really that relevant. The problem is it's there. It can be subversive, such as anti-Zionism campaigns, which are really anti-Semitism.
Well, first of all, we've got to define two things. First of all, there's two branches of anti-Semitism. There's anti-Jewishness and anti-Zionism, which is primarily shown in anti-Israelism. Anti-Semitism, I would say, encompasses both, but people have taken it upon themselves to redefine anti-Semitism as being anti-Jewish rather than being anti-Israel. Therefore, it now becoming morally unobjectable to be anti-Israel, whereas it used to before be objectable for people to say this. I do think there's a growing problem, not helped at all by the fact of the media's reporting of Israel.
There's definitely a problem with anti-Semitism in England. You hear all sorts about how kids on buses get beaten up. I've been fairly lucky. I haven't actually. I don't think I've ever been beaten up, but I've had names called, people shouting at me, I've heard stories of other people. But me personally, I've been particularly lucky, nothing more than name calling. Yeah, there was one time when I was walking home one Friday evening, and I got stones showered in my general direction. But that's the worst. That was a one-off.
I haven't experienced it myself, but I have heard of instances where it's happened. For example, I know the case where one of our relatives got stabbed in the tube because he was Jewish 12 times and survived. And other instances where my family, because some of my family are a bit more religious, so they walk around on Shabbat with their kippahs and stuff, and they've been thrown rocks at. My uncle's really religious, and he's walks in and out of the office, so obviously everyone else knows that he's Jewish, and the business has been around forever, so everyone knows they're Jews, and they've drawn swastikas on the windows and vandalized the shop.
You occasionally get a comment thrown at you, innocuous comments thrown at you. You will sometimes, I'm not sure it's can be defined as anti-Semitism, but sometimes I think of self-consciousness as a visible Jew. You sometimes feel as if people are watching you. This stems from the fact that in the past people have been watching you.
I think it does exist, but I think it's quite well hidden. I think that the way it manifests itself is really anti-Israel rather than anti-Jewish.
And I think it's more the covert rather than the overt, through job applications. I mean, it's fine. If you can see racism, it's easy to combat. You'll just avoid those people. But when you're applying for a job, how do you know if that person's racist? How do you know? I mean, it's really hard. And then if you do say something, you're blamed for playing the race card or whatever. And it's just it's a catch-22, and it's really hard.
I've noticed there are so many different ways of being anti-Semitic without actually being overtly anti-Semitic.
Probably my worst experience is when it's going to get very personal, but I had an interview at Birmingham for medical school, and it happened that it was on a Friday afternoon, and I made it that I could stay there for Shabbos and everything, and the whole half of the beginning of my interview was all religious, and how could I be religious and keep Shabbat basically and still be a Jew, which I thought was completely irrelevant.
Anti-Semitism has always been an issue in Britain and will always be an issue within society. The major problem we see in anti-Semitism in its contemporary form is its relationship to the State of Israel. And it's this form of anti-Semitism where people will use the State of Israel as a stick to beat the Jews with that anti-Semitism is really a problem. Classical anti-Semitism and Jew hatred is usually and roundly condemned by the majority of society. It's only where we see Israel into the mix that people's politics start to differ, and we see problems with contemporary anti-Semitism and people not taking it seriously.
I think people try to make a difference, but I think that maybe non-understanding and maybe hatred of Zionism is tied up altogether with Judaism, because I don't think you can really differentiate between the two. So I think that one kind of moves into the other.
I don't know, I think people, they might, the whole Israel-Palestinian debate, they might criticise the Israeli state, and then it might spill over into just anti-Jewish feeling. I think that's really wrong. I think you should really clearly separate the two, because one's a country. So if I criticise Israel, I'm not criticising... You shouldn't criticise Jews generally, and I think it's really wrong.
Anything to do with Jews always leads to Israel.
I don't agree with Joshua, Chief Rabbi, who says it's anti-Semitic to disagree with Israel's foreign policy or the Israeli government's position. I don't think that, although I really see where he's coming from, because you cannot have Israel without there being you can't have Jews without there being Israel.
I think we're fools to think that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are the same thing. If we look at things properly, anti-Zionism is fundamentally a belief that if we were around in 1948, we would not choose to support a state of Israel, we would not choose to emancipate the Jewish people and choose the role of self-definition. There were a lot of Jews who felt this as well. And if someone is a principled anti-Zionist that just believes that, then there shouldn't really be a problem. That's not against the Jewish people. However, if someone says, I'm an anti-Zionist, but I believe in the destruction of the state of Israel, or I believe in supporting suicide bombings, or I believe that Jews in this country are accountable for what happens in the Middle East, but they're doing it as a guise as an anti-Zionist, that's when we have to start asking questions. The general phrase I would use is that anti-Zionism is not necessarily anti-Semitism, because the numbers of pure anti-Zionists who are honest and proper about their academia and their work are sadly few and far between. The majority of anti-Zionists, or people who use anti-Zionist rhetoric, will use language that either they choose to incite hatred of Jews, or will, whether they want it to or not, discriminate and affect the welfare of Jewish people.
It's hard to entirely separate anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. The two somehow do link together, and I think if I don't understand it fully, and I'm actively trying to understand it, how is the normal person who doesn't make any active effort to learn about the situation, how are they going to feel about it? How are they going to think about it, given what the media is feeding them? It's going to be difficult to differentiate between these different ideologies, ideas, policies.
The only solution is education, but I can't say that education will change things in the next 50 years. I think it'll take generations.
The only solution could be if people become more tolerant.
Knowledge, understanding,
Interfaith.
a debate of ideas.
Well, we're trying to promote more education and interfaith activities.
The answer to your question is debate. A debate of ideas, where people have an open forum to speak how they feel, bring their problems and explain them, and give the other side the opportunity to answer and ask questions.
The best way to fight anti-Semitism is to fight all forms of racism. And when you take a principled stance on any forms of injustice, fighting any forms of discrimination against minorities, you build an environment where there is no place for any forms of racism.